What's up, everybody? So I got a question from Christelle. Apologize if I botched up the name, but so the question is about Dynamesh. How high in resolution will it go? Typically, whenever I'm working, um, and so really it kind of depends. For me, it depends on what it is that I'm trying to do. And the rule of thumb that I try and use is less to more. Less. Only use the amount of resolution that you need until your mesh demands more, right? And the reason why is because it only causes problems later. So I'm just grabbing a sphere. I'm going to make it a polymesh 3D. And I'm just going to go down to Dynamesh. And so the default resolution, if you're familiar with it, is usually 128. And so I want to explain how Dynamesh works. Dynamesh works based on resolution and it works based on the scale of an object, right? So I'm just going to crank this all the way down to a resolution of 16 and remesh it. And so what Dynamesh is doing is basically it's projecting new geometry on top of the original geometry. So it's going from, a plane up top, bottom, left, right, front, and back, right? So it's basically just casting new geo. Now, if let me turn on my floor here. And let me get rid of that. Okay. So what happens is, say we scale this up, right? And I'm just gonna scale it up slightly. So when we scale, if I maintain the same resolution of 16 and do a remesh, you're going to see that the surface changes. And so it's going to give you more resolution, even though it's going to give you more resolution, even though you're still at the same resolution, if that makes sense, right? So because it's got more surface area to cover. And so I'm sitting at 1580 right now. Previously, I was sitting at 770, right? So it's just a back and forth game depending on what it is that you're trying to do. So I mean, it's really difficult to say how high will I go. The highest I'll go is whatever I need to be able to accomplish the task. So what I'll usually do, especially in the beginning stages of a sculpture, is I'll start out quite low, usually around 16 or 32. And let's say I'm working on like a character sculpt or something. I'll use this stage to get my general shapes. Just as if I was using if I was doing subdivisions. So I'll stick pretty low on this, and then let's say I've exhausted pretty much everything that I need. Then I'll bump it up. So from here I'll bump it up to say 32. Right? And that's going to give me more to play with. So it really just depends on your style. It depends on what you're trying to go after. And, so I can't really give you a right or wrong answer. It really just depends on your workflow. Well, once you get down to things like lips and stuff like that, yeah, you're going to want to bump it up considerably. I mean, it depends on how much resolution you want. I mean, um, what I see a lot of people do is they'll do this. So let me turn everything off. So we'll just sculpt a quick face. So what I'll see a lot of people do um, is they'll come through and get like the base stuff in first, right? So the throw like the basic information in, get the nose going. and they'll usually play around with the resolution. So see, I'm not going up too terribly high. I'm just using what I need to get away with it. But you don't need to have a ton of information to get some lips in there. And I'll show you. This will be the dumbest looking character in the world. But you know, I'm sitting at a pretty low resolution considerably, and those might not be lips to you, but it's a starting point. But what I'll do is I'll usually add geometry into here, but the resolution I'll usually go with, and again, it depends on the size. Um, I usually find myself sitting somewhere around a resolution of 200 or 300, right? So let's have a look. So if I remesh at this level, it gets pretty dense, right? And so I'm looking at 172,000 polys now. And so that's plenty to get some lips in there, right? But something else that I'll see a lot of people do is, you know, and so here's the other thing with working too high, right? So once you get up to a certain level, things become difficult to start working with, right? Because you have so much uh, topology, so many points to work with. Your smooth brush isn't going to be quite as effective. Yeah, you can go through and control the intensity, right, to a degree, but right now I'm sitting at an intensity of 100. If I were to subdivide this, 2 or 3 times, then good luck trying to smooth things out. So sometimes what I'll see people do is they'll come through and they'll get their base shapes, right. So they'll go through and I'm just going to use a Damien standard. They'll come through and get the basic information that they want in here, their eyes, and their noses and everything. They won't put a ton of detail into it, and maybe some lips to a degree. But before they get too much further, they'll actually take this over and do a Z remesh on it. Now, I mean, this is just a workflow. It's not the workflow, right? But they'll get some basic information in here, and maybe they want to continue working on this, but things are kind of going crazy. So what I'll see them do, this is something I've seen Danny Williams do. He'll go up to the Z remesher and he'll just chop it all the way down, right? And maybe he'll duplicate this first, and he'll go to the Z remesher and chop it all the way down and do a Z remesh. It's going to go through and bust things down a bit. Come on. And so now I've got some different topology, but it's a little bit more friendly, right? So I can just, from here, I can just do some projections. So I can go project all, subdivide, project, subdivide, project, subdivide, project. And so now I've got essentially the same mesh. I've got how many subdivision levels? I've got 4 subdivision levels with just as much information, but a, pretty much a quarter of the less than a quarter of the topology, right? So it's all about how you manage the topology, and that's all I can say. Is you got to understand these principles about how this stuff works, and once you do, it'll help you save time. I don't know what happened there. Projection problem. That's easily smoothed out. Hope that makes sense. Yeah, I can talk about textures. Let me grab a file real quick. For polygon modeling, I guess it just depends on kind of where I start. These days, I tend to work in Maya a lot more, or not Maya, ZBrush. Apologies. I tend to work in ZBrush a lot more, just because that's generally where I start out. But I'm comfortable in either one. ZBrush is a little bit faster for me. I don't know why. I think it's probably because I'm working with a stylus and everything, so that probably has a lot to do with it. All right, so texturing. So if you're going through and you're creating a character and you gotta get geometry out of ZBrush, right? You're either going to do manual retopology here inside of ZBrush. I've seen people get away with using the zmodeler or the zremesher. For me, it never works out quite the way that they show in the tutorials. I don't know whether I'm doing something wrong or they're just not sharing everything that they know. But the way that it goes is that you've got a mesh, and you've gone through and you've painted it up, right? And yeah, you can use just Photoshop and ZBrush for texturing. I mean, if you really wanted to, you can go straight from ZBrush. I mean, I know there are tons of programs like Mari and all these other programs that that are intended for texturing and everything like that. But just because you don't have that doesn't mean you can't work, right? So basically, the way it goes is you got your freaking mesh, right? And so what I've done with this is I took this mesh and it's a complete Dynamesh workflow, and I duplicated it just like I did with that previous demo, right? And I went through and Z remeshed it. Okay, and whenever I did that, I ended up with this, which is my replacement geometry. Okay, in fact, I think I actually went into 3D Coat and created this topology. Maybe not. Maybe it's been a while since I worked on this one. But anyway, I ended up coming up with new geometry. Okay, so you're either gonna have to do that by hand or you know you're gonna have to figure out a way to do that. But you need to get UVs out of this, and so this probably already has UVs applied to it. Yep. So let's say you don't have UVs, right? Um, let's say I need to get a completely new set of UVs, and I've been working on this face for a while. I'm going to end up going up to my Z plugin and going up to UV master, right? And the way that UVs work inside of ZBrush is you kind of paint on your seams, right? And so I'm going to turn this texture off, texture map off. Okay. And so what you do is basically you just use the topology that you have. You have this unwrap all. You can unwrap by symmetry or by polygroups, and so by polygroups is going to be beneficial for other things. Right now I've got this face. Like if I wanted to break these ears off into their own little island, then I could create them as I can assign them a polygroup, and then it'll actually break all that stuff off. I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to do a basic unwrap. But what you'll do is you'll go through and usually you want to work on a clone. So what this is going to do, you hit work on clone, and it's going to drop this over into a completely separate tool, right? And so from here, now you'll be able to start working. So what you'll do is hit control paint, enable control painting. And what happens is as soon as you hit protect, you're going to use protect, attract, or erase. Okay, so protect works in red only, attract works in blue only, and then erase is going to work in white only. So we want to assign what we want to be protected. So basically, we're telling ZBrush this is where I don't want seams. Okay, so you're going to go through, and what I like to do is just flood the entire thing. And what will happen, and depending on what brush you have, whatever brush you're using, it'll turn off Z-add and turn on RGB. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit fill object, and I like to just fill the entire thing, right? So I flooded this entire thing saying I don't want any seams whatsoever right now. And then I'll come through and say attract. And so whenever I do this, it switches over to this blue. I still got RGB on, and basically all I'm going to do is just draw out some seams. So I'm just going to draw this down. While I'm drawing down, I'm holding shift so it stays in fairly straight line. Okay. So once that's done, then I'll come through and I'll do unwrap. So hit unwrap. And you can check your seams. Sometimes you'll end up with some funky results, but most of the time it does pretty good. And so it's checking seams, and there's my seam, right? And then you can hit flatten. There we go. That's how it looks flattened. Unflatten it. Turn off check seams. And then whenever you're done with this, you just want to copy these UVs, and then you'll want to go back over to your original project, which is this one, and you want to make sure that you paste those UVs. And so now the UVs that you just created are going to be assigned to this model. And you can check down here under UV map, which is underneath your tool palette, and just make sure that this morph UV is accessible. If it's not available, you don't have UVs. There's no two ways about it. So basically, it really just comes down to exporting your textures and exporting your model. So if you're looking to export textures, then what you'll do is say you've gone through and painted this thing up. There are a couple of rules that you need to follow here in ZBrush to be able to get the max out of it. So what we're going to do I have Maya open? I'm going to open up Maya, and I've got Photoshop open already. It's another texture I was working on. Alright, so I've got all this information taken care of. Alright, got Maya open. So what we're going to do is I'm going to kind of use the GoZ to kind of send some things over. But I do want to create some textures and some normal maps, right? You can use X normal or whatever, but you can create textures pretty okay here in ZBrush, so don't count it out. So what I'm going to do is for my texture map, right? Because I created new UVs, it looks like it's pretty much the same. But just because we created new UVs, we want to go ahead and make a new texture map just in case anything changed on it. So to do that, you're going to want to create that from your polypaint. Okay. Now, polypaint is based on the density of the model, right? So if I created a polypaint texture from the lowest subdivision, it's not going to give me the highest quality texture map. So we want to make sure that we're working at the highest subdivision level possible, right? So I am, and I'm just going to go down texture map, create new from polypaint. Okay, so I'm going to do that, and there it is. Okay, so while I'm here, before I do anything with this, I want to go ahead and create a normal map, and I'm also going to create a displacement map, and I'll show you why. So I'm going to go normal map, and whenever I'm creating a normal or a displacement map, I want to work from a lower subdivision level. So I'm going to drop it all the way down to 1, and I'm going to hit create normal map. And there are a couple things that you can change. So if you turn off tangent, it's just going to make it in color space or object space normals, right? So if you turn that off, it'll change the effect that you get. So I can go turn off, create normal, and you'll see how it changes. But I'm just going to use a tangent space normal. There we go. And then I'm going to grab a displacement map as well. So grab displacement. And I'll show you why I do this. Something else that you can do, you can also grab an AO out of ZBrush. And the way you want to do that is bring it all the way up to the highest subdivision level possible. And the way you can do this is under masking, right? And what you can do is mask by ambient occlusion. And you want to adjust the occlusion intensity up to, I like to put it up around like say 6 or 7. Now, do consider that it will take some time depending on what your system is capable of, right? Mine usually doesn't take very long, so I'm just going to hit mask by ambient occlusion, right? And it's going to go through, it's going to surface, and it's basically going to apply a mask. And as you can see, it does take a little bit of time. All right, so essentially what would happen is once you have this AO, things kind of went crazy there for a second. But basically, once you have this AO, you just create an alpha from it, right? And then what it'll do is it'll reside over here in this alpha palette. There's not a ton of information on this to really even use an AO, but if you're using it for, say, texturing purposes or whatnot, it might be something worth grabbing. We are going to use this displacement map for a couple of things, and I'll show you what I like to use it for. So basically, I've got pretty much all the textures that I really need for this specific thing, and it's always creepy having a model up without eyeballs. But so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this information and we need to get it out of ZBrush, right? So I'm going to clone these, right? So I've got to get these out of here and into my actual texture palette, right? So I'm going to go clone, and what will happen is that it takes this and drops it over into your texture palette. Now, if you're going out to Maya, you're going to want to, or Maya or Max, you're going to want to flip these, right? So I need to flip these in the vertical, and whenever I do that, I'm going to go export, and this is going to, you want to create a folder or something. So texture, you just want to have somewhere that all this stuff makes sense. So so I'm going to save that there. It's going to ask me if I want to save the material info. I'm not going to do that at this point. If that's something that's important to you, then definitely go for it. The other thing that I want to grab is my displacement. So I'm going to say clone displacement. Now this jumps over to the alpha palette, right? So anything dealing with black and white information is going to go over to your alpha. So same thing here. I need to flip this in the vertical. So I'm just going to flip it, do an export. And then the same thing with this normal map, right? I'm just going to go clone normal. Now, because it's color information, it's going to go into the texture palette, right? And same thing, flip in the vertical, export, and use naming convention you would like to. Okay, and then the next thing, the last thing I really want to do is I need to make sure that my model gets to where I need it to be. Okay, now you could just do all this stuff through the multi-map exporter, right? But I'm so used to doing it by hand. Sometimes I just forgo this entire section. But you can use this Z plugin to speed up your process, and it'll go through and grab your polypaint, grab your AO, grab the cavity maps, and all the stuff that you need for it. And there are options in here, and particularly with the normal map. If you ever run into a situation where you export a normal map and it's blocky or it's very squared off, it's probably because you don't have smooth UVs on and smooth normals. So if that ever happens whenever you're exporting textures out of ZBrush, make sure that this sort of stuff is turned on. Okay, so we're going to take this information and composite it in Photoshop, but I also want to get my model out of here. So I'm just going to drop this down to the lowest subdivision level. And then I'm going to use, I would say use Go Z, but because since I applied Go Z to Dash 3D or Dash Studio, it's been defaulting to that. So I need to go through and adjust that. So I'm just going to save this OBJ out. Now, something that you want to pay attention to is that whenever you are exporting out of ZBrush, something that will happen from time to time is that if you have multiple polygroups apply to a character, whenever you import it into another program, um, it'll recognize those as separate hierarchies, right? So just be aware that if you don't need them to be separate, then just make it all one polygroup and you'll be fine. So I'm just going to import this model, and Maya doesn't have a current, it's not set to that project, so I've got to navigate to it. So my model is right there. Go ahead and frame it. And let's use these textures a little bit. So I'm going to open up these here. So I'm going to go grab that. So that's all my textures. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to drop it on top of here. And let's see, I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to turn it off for now. And for this one, I'm just going to make it a multiply. But I'm going to drop the intensity. It's a tune. It doesn't need to be terribly intense. And so you can use this somewhat as an AO. And so what I'll do is I'll grab that, maybe even apply a little bit of a blur to it. Okay. And so for this, I'll say this is my texture, right? So, and you usually probably want to save this out as a target. And then I'll work on this one, but I'm going to use this mostly for my spec, right? Now you can create your own spec just by drawing out on the model, but I like to use the displacement a bit just to kind of fudge it. It's not I don't imagine it's the best way to go about things, but for my purposes it's fine. And so basically I'll just use this levels to kind of squash things down. And control where those highlights are going to land. I'll do that. And so I'll save this out as tune spec, and I'll save this out as a targa. And then if you can make changes to your normal map, I always export these just in case I want to apply some other stuff into it. In this case, I'm not going to. I'm just going to save it out as a target as well. And then I'm just going to hop over to Maya, and you can use whatever program you want to. But I'm going to hop over to Maya, and the first thing I want to do with this mesh is I'm going to change the vertex angle. So I'm just going to adjust the angle to 90, so it's going to soften this up a bit. Okay. And then I'm going to go through and start applying a texture. So I'm just going to I'm going to assign a new material. I'll just use a standard blend. You can use a Lambert or whatever you want to. And for the color, I just start plugging things in like usual, right? And definitely, if you're working on a project in Maya, set your project. Otherwise, you have to go through and do all this crap. So learn from me. And in Maya, you need to turn on your textures. So I'm just hitting 6 on the keyboard. Turn that on. And really, it's just plug and play. Bump map. Grab file. Use tangent space. Assign the file. Now, if I were to use GoZ, most of this stuff would normally just automatically populate. Right? So there's my normals. And the next thing I want to control is my spec color. So I'm going to go File, Spec. There we go. Now, the way to see whether or not this is working is we might want to drop a light in here. So I'm going to go Create Light. We'll just grab a point light. We need to turn lights on so we can see how things are working. And I'm just using this Viewport 2.0. It seems to work pretty well for basic stuff. And if you really wanted to, if you don't want to go for game resolution, you can actually apply a smooth mesh preview. It'll soften things up a little bit. And so you can go through, once you're in here, then you can go through, play with your textures, and try to come up with something reasonable, right? And so, you know, if I want to control the specularity a bit, control how it falls off. But again, it's reading from that that spec map that I created, right? So the spec is really going to be limited to those areas that I told it that I wanted it to be, right? And so that's pretty much the basics of it. You know, with your lights, you can control things like shadows. Use depth map. Change the filter, say 4. Lighting, shadows. That way you actually have fall off. You know, and it's a matter of blending things together and, you know, making a nice scene. And you could do the same thing with like Marmoset or any other program. You know, it's just the program and the principles behind it are kind of one and the same, right? So it just whatever you can do in Maya, you can do in Marmoset or whatever it is. So I hope that helps. If not, let me know, and we'll see what we can come up with.